Trump's campaign has just slammed headfirst into a catastrophe that no amount of spin can undo. This isn't a routine fundraising slowdown or a temporary donor pause. This is a mass exodus that has shaken the very foundation of his political operation. 73 major donors have officially pulled their financial support, including 19 individuals who previously contributed more than $1 million each. These are not casual contributors or fair weather supporters. These are the backbone financiers of modern Republican campaigns, people who have bankrolled GOP candidates for decades. When donors of this caliber walk away all at once, it signals that something inside the campaign has gone terribly wrong. What makes this collapse so extraordinary is the reason behind it. According to leaked internal memos and campaign finance documents obtained by multiple media outlets, tens of millions of dollars in campaign contributions were allegedly diverted to cover Trump's mounting personal legal expenses. This wasn't disclosed as such to donors. Money that contributors believed would be used for ads, organizing, voter outreach, and ground operations was instead routed to criminal defense attorneys handling Trump's various court cases. That revelation detonated like a bomb inside Republican donor circles.
Sources inside the Republican National Committee say donor confidence evaporated almost overnight once these documents surfaced. Contributors realized that what they thought was a political campaign was, in practice, operating like a legal defense fund. For many donors, this crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. Supporting a controversial candidate is one thing. Being unknowingly billed for someone's personal criminal defense is something else entirely. This wasn't treated as a minor accounting issue or an honest mistake. Donors viewed it as a fundamental breach of trust. Several longtime GOP financiers have compared the moment to Watergate-era panic, but even that comparison falls short. Back then, donors quietly stopped writing checks. This time, they are publicly burning bridges. They're issuing statements, talking to the press, and in some cases demanding investigations. That level of open rebellion is almost unheard of in modern campaign politics. Tensions had already been building for months. Polling numbers were underwhelming, campaign messaging was inconsistent, and concerns about electability were growing louder in private donor meetings. Still, many donors were willing to stick it out, hoping the campaign would stabilize. Everything changed on January 9th, when an internal audit reportedly leaked to the Wall Street Journal. Conducted by independent forensic accountants, the audit documented at least 47 separate transfers of campaign funds to law firms representing Trump in legal matters unrelated to campaign compliance. According to people familiar with the audit, these weren't standard legal expenses tied to ballot access or election law. They were payments tied to criminal defense in cases stemming from Trump's personal conduct. For donors, that distinction mattered enormously. They had not agreed to bankroll legal battles that had nothing to do with winning an election. When members of the Republican Donors Coalition reviewed the findings in an emergency session, the reaction was immediate and explosive. Participants described the atmosphere as chaotic and angry. These were people who had collectively given billions of dollars to Republican causes over the last 20 years. They understood campaign finance rules. They understood political risk. What they saw, they believed, crossed ethical and possibly legal boundaries.
On January 11th, 73 of the party's largest donors joined a private conference call to decide what to do next. By all accounts, the call was tense from the start. Voices were raised, accusations flew. One donor after another expressed disbelief that campaign funds could be handled this way. Hedge fund billionaire Kenneth Langley reportedly warned that continuing to donate after seeing the evidence could expose contributors to legal and reputational risk. Oil heiress Patricia Whitmore allegedly called the situation the worst betrayal of donor trust she had witnessed in her lifetime of political giving. By the end of the 90-minute call, the decision was made. A joint statement would be drafted and released publicly. All financial support would be withdrawn effective immediately. The statement accused the campaign of systematically deceiving donors and treating them as an unlimited ATM for personal legal problems. It was released the next day and sent shockwaves through the political world. What followed only made matters worse. When donors began requesting explanations and in some cases refunds, the campaign reportedly went silent. Calls went unanswered. Emails were ignored. Even longtime allies with direct access to senior campaign staff couldn't get a response. That silence was interpreted as confirmation that the situation was far more serious than initially believed. Then came the escalation no one expected. David Chen, a Silicon Valley billionaire who had been instrumental in funding Trump's digital operations in 2020, took the nuclear option. He filed a formal complaint with the Federal Election Commission demanding a full investigation into what he described as the largest campaign finance fraud in American history. His complaint reportedly included detailed documentation, including screenshots from campaign finance software showing money flowing directly from donor accounts to criminal defense law firms. According to the complaint, over a 6-month period, roughly 43% of all major donor contributions were diverted for non-campaign legal expenses. That allegation sent panic rippling through Republican fundraising circles. When a donor of that stature goes public and involves federal regulators, it sends a clear message to every other contributor. Protect yourself because this could get ugly. As the story spread, the damage compounded. Donors weren't just withdrawing quietly anymore. They were speaking to financial media, issuing statements, and distancing themselves as loudly as possible. The perception hardened that the campaign was not merely struggling but actively misleading the people funding it. And once that perception takes hold, it is almost impossible to reverse. The moment this crisis spilled into the financial press, the situation moved from bad to catastrophic. When Kenneth Langley appeared on CNBC to explain why he pulled his support, it wasn't a carefully scripted political move. Viewers could see genuine anger. He spoke not as a partisan operative, but as a businessman who felt deceived. He explained that he had funded Republican candidates through scandals, controversies, and losses, but had never experienced a situation where his money was allegedly repurposed for someone's personal legal survival. His words hit like a hammer. He said that once donor money is treated as a personal slush fund, politics ends and fraud begins. That appearance changed everything. Donor revolts usually stay behind closed doors. This one went public in real time. Financial analysts immediately noted that when billionaires start airing grievances on national business television, it signals a complete collapse of trust. The implications went far beyond Trump's campaign. Mid-level donors began panicking. Small donors started questioning whether their $25 and $50 contributions were also being used to pay lawyers instead of buying ads or organizing voters. Inside Republican fundraising circles, the mood turned toxic. Fundraisers reported phones going dead. Scheduled high-dollar events were abruptly canceled. Bundlers quietly informed campaigns that checks they had expected would not be coming. Some donors reportedly demanded written guarantees about how future funds would be used, something almost unheard of in presidential politics. The assumption of trust that underpins political fundraising had shattered. This crisis didn't emerge in a vacuum. For months, donors had been expressing private concerns about erratic messaging, staff turnover, and declining enthusiasm among swing voters. Those issues alone might not have triggered a mass exodus. But once donors believed their money was being misused, every other weakness became intolerable. Poor polls could be forgiven. Legal trouble could be rationalized. Financial deception could not. The campaign's response only deepened the hole. Rather than opening its books or providing transparent explanations, leadership chose confrontation and denial. That strategy backfired instantly. Legal experts pointed out that donors have a legal right to know how their money is spent. Dismissing their concerns as disloyalty or conspiracy only reinforced the impression that the campaign had something to hide. Behind the scenes, panic reportedly set in at campaign headquarters. Emergency meetings were held late into the night. Staffers described frantic attempts to triage the damage. Some proposed creating an independent financial oversight board made up of donor representatives. Others floated the idea of placing campaign funds into escrow accounts controlled by third parties. These were extraordinary suggestions, reflecting how dire the situation had become. But for many donors, it was too little, too late. Meanwhile, the broader Republican ecosystem began to feel the shockwaves. State parties that rely on transfers from the national campaign started bracing for budget shortfalls. Down-ballot candidates worried about joint fundraising events becoming radioactive. Several Senate and House candidates reportedly canceled appearances with Trump-aligned fundraisers, fearing association with a campaign under investigation. The financial interconnectedness of modern campaigns meant that one collapse threatened to drag others down with it. Comparisons to past scandals only underscored how unusual this moment was. During Watergate, donor support faded quietly as the scandal worsened. In the John Edwards case, donors fled once the misuse of funds became clear, but Edwards was already politically finished. In this case, Trump remained the presumptive nominee when the donor revolt exploded. That made the situation unprecedented. Never before had a major party nominee faced such an open, early, and aggressive financial rebellion from their own donor class. As the story grew, more details emerged from the leaked audit. Financial experts reviewing the documents said the alleged scheme wasn't sloppy. It appeared deliberate. Payments to law firms were reportedly hidden under vague budget categories like compliance services and regulatory management. In some cases, invoices were allegedly mislabeled to obscure their true purpose. To donors, this suggested intent, not error. That distinction mattered enormously. Honest mistakes can be forgiven. Systematic deception cannot. Several donors privately expressed fear that continuing to support the campaign could expose them to legal scrutiny. If regulators concluded that funds were knowingly misused, questions could arise about who knew what and when. For wealthy individuals with public profiles and corporate interests, that risk was unacceptable. As donations dried up, the campaign's financial reality became stark. Recent filings suggested cash on hand had plunged to dangerously low levels. Advertising reservations in key swing states were canceled. Field offices faced closure. Staffers reported delays in reimbursements and growing anxiety about payroll. The machine that once boasted of unmatched fundraising prowess was sputtering. The irony was brutal. The very legal cases that allegedly consumed campaign funds were becoming harder to fight as money evaporated. Legal defense is expensive, and without a steady flow of cash, even top-tier attorneys become difficult to retain. The campaign appeared trapped in a death spiral, where using funds for legal defense undermined fundraising, which in turn weakened both the political campaign and the legal defense. Public reaction split sharply. Trump's base erupted in anger at the donors, accusing them of betrayal and elitism. Social media filled with calls for grassroots supporters to step up and replace billionaire funding. While small-dollar donors are a vital part of modern campaigns, financial analysts were blunt about the math. Losing hundreds of millions in large contributions cannot realistically be offset by $20 and $50 donations, no matter how passionate the base. As January progressed, the sense of inevitability grew. Insiders whispered that even if the campaign survived legally, it might not survive financially. Staffers reportedly began updating resumes. Consultants quietly sought other work. The perception took hold that the operation might not last through the election cycle. And once that perception spreads, it becomes self-fulfilling. By mid-January, the donor revolt had evolved into something larger than a campaign crisis. It became a test case for the entire political fundraising system. If the allegations proved true, they raised uncomfortable questions about oversight, enforcement, and accountability. Donors began demanding structural reforms, including independent audits and clearer legal boundaries on how campaign funds can be used. The trust that fuels political money had been badly shaken, and rebuilding it would not be easy. As the fallout intensified, the political damage began to morph into something far more dangerous, a legal and institutional reckoning. Former campaign finance officials from both parties started speaking out, warning that if even a fraction of the allegations were proven, the consequences could extend far beyond fines or administrative penalties. Several experts noted that knowingly misrepresenting how donor funds are used can cross into wire fraud territory, especially when contributions are solicited online and transferred across state lines. That possibility alone was enough to terrify donors who had once written checks without a second thought. Inside the Republican National Committee, conversations reportedly turned grim. Party leaders found themselves in an impossible position. Publicly distancing themselves from the campaign risked enraging Trump's base. Staying silent risked being dragged into a scandal that donors were now openly labeling fraudulent. According to insiders, senior RNC figures quietly consulted outside counsel to assess potential exposure and to determine whether formal separation from the campaign's fundraising apparatus was legally advisable. The fact that such discussions were even happening underscored how severe the situation had become. Meanwhile, the Federal Election Commission complaint filed by David Chen continued to ripple outward. Other donors began quietly submitting supplemental documentation to regulators, not necessarily to pile on, but to protect themselves. Lawyers advised wealthy contributors that proactively cooperating could help demonstrate they were victims of deception rather than participants in misconduct. That advice accelerated the unraveling. Every new document handed over to investigators increased pressure on the campaign and reduced the chance of containing the damage. Public statements from donors grew harsher. Morgan Whitfield announced she was not only withdrawing support, but organizing a new donor coalition dedicated to funding Republican candidates who publicly condemned the alleged misuse of campaign funds. Her message was clear. Loyalty to the party did not mean blind loyalty to one candidate. Tech entrepreneur Robert Giao went further, demanding the return of every dollar he had contributed since 2023 and threatening civil litigation if the campaign refused. These were not symbolic gestures. They were financial and legal declarations of war. The business community took notice. Corporate executives who had quietly supported the campaign through personal donations began backing away. Several CEOs told reporters anonymously that contributing to a campaign under this level of scrutiny posed unacceptable reputational risk. One Wall Street executive remarked that any company handling finances this way would trigger immediate board intervention and executive firings. Applying that same standard to a presidential campaign was a sobering comparison. As the donor class retreated, the campaign attempted to project strength. Public statements insisted fundraising was strong and grassroots support was surging. But behind the scenes, the reality looked very different. Television stations in multiple swing states confirmed that planned ad buys had been canceled or indefinitely postponed. Vendors complained of late payments. Field organizers reported being asked to operate with skeleton budgets. The disconnect between public messaging and internal reality only deepened skepticism. Trump himself responded in characteristic fashion, lashing out at donors on social media. He branded them disloyal, accused them of being part of an entrenched establishment, and dismissed the audit as fake news. For donors already questioning his judgment, the outbursts were the final straw. Instead of reassuring contributors, the attacks reinforced the belief that the campaign was unwilling or unable to provide transparency. Legal analysts quickly pointed out the risks of such a response. Donors have explicit rights under campaign finance law to understand how their money is used. Publicly attacking them for raising questions could be construed as intimidation. If regulators chose to pursue that angle, it would compound the campaign's problems. The more aggressive the denials became, the more observers wondered why opening the books wasn't the obvious solution. As February approached, the broader consequences came into focus. Presidential campaigns rely on three pillars: message, organization, and money. At this point, money was collapsing. Organization was following close behind. Without funds, staffers leave, offices close, and momentum dies. Even the most loyal message cannot reach voters without resources to amplify it. The campaign risked becoming a hollow shell, loud but ineffective. The legal cases looming over Trump only intensified the pressure. Court schedules throughout 2024 promised enormous legal bills. Without donor support, paying for a robust defense became increasingly difficult. Financial experts described it as a classic death spiral. Funds diverted to legal defense undermined fundraising, which then made both campaigning and legal defense unsustainable. Each problem fed the other. Voters, meanwhile, watched the spectacle unfold. For some supporters, the donor revolt confirmed long-held suspicions about elites and establishment power. For others, it raised serious doubts about competence and integrity. Pollsters began noting increased uncertainty among independent voters who cited financial misconduct as a growing concern. Trust, once lost, proved hard to rebuild. By mid-January, the campaign's expected FEC filing was anticipated with near-morbid fascination. Insiders predicted an unprecedented drop in major donor contributions, and whispers circulated that the numbers would confirm an 80+% decline. If true, it would mark one of the sharpest fundraising collapses ever recorded for a major party nominee. At that point, recovery would border on impossible. Even within Trump's inner circle, confidence reportedly wavered. Staffers quietly explored exit options. Consultants distanced themselves. Allies began speaking in conditional language about the future. The aura of inevitability that once surrounded the campaign was gone, replaced by uncertainty and fear. What made the moment so consequential was its broader implication. This wasn't just about one candidate's finances. It was about whether political fundraising could function without meaningful trust and oversight. Donors, regulators, and voters alike were forced to confront uncomfortable questions about accountability. If a campaign could allegedly treat contributions as a personal ATM, what safeguards truly existed? As the dominoes continued to fall, one reality became clear. The donor revolt was no longer a phase or a tactic. It was a structural collapse. The relationships, assumptions, and financial pipelines that had sustained the campaign were broken. Whether the legal system would ultimately confirm the allegations remained to be seen, but politically, the damage was already done. A campaign that once thrived on money and momentum was now struggling to survive under the weight of its own financial controversy, with consequences that would echo far beyond a single election cycle.